God is just, he said aloud. Then he went to the cellar and added a stone that night, off schedule, breaking his ritual for the first time in 20 years. But vengeance is a strange companion. At first, it comforts, then it whispers, then it demands more. And in the silence of his nights, Thomas began to feel something new. He felt watched. When he lit his lantern and passed by the cellar door, he thought he heard breathing, not from himself, but from the stones. Not heavy, but steady, as though his hatred had become alive, watching him, waiting. He stopped praying. Even his Bible, marked and underlined with fury, stayed closed. His soul had become a house of silence. But silence, when married to revenge, is never empty. It festers. It speaks in the dark. And it was in that darkness that a letter came. Late spring, 1852, folded in trembling script, left at his gate. Thomas recognized the hand. Michael, brother, if you can still call me that, I am dying. I do not ask for comfort, only that I might see your face once more. Just once. Before I stand before God, there is much I must say, much I must repent. I will come to Elmbrook. I will not stay, but I must face you. Please, Michael. Thomas read it 3 times. Then he took it to the forge, held it over the coals, and watched the fire consume every word. He said nothing. But the next day, the villagers noticed something new. Thomas Reed was digging a trench along the inside of his gate, deep and narrow. When asked what for, he said only, "Some visitors come uninvited." And then he returned to the cellar, where he selected the largest stone yet. It was a Wednesday when Michael Reed returned to Elmbrook. The spring air was thick with the smell of damp earth and the slow rot of last autumn's leaves. The river ran high from recent rains, and clouds clung low to hills like morning shawls. Michael arrived on foot, leaning hard on a crooked cane, his coat thin and patched, hair silvered and clinging to his skull like ash on old parchment. His face was hollow, cheekbones sharp, eyes sunken like he hadn't slept in years. He stood at the edge of the village like a man stepping onto sacred ground he knew he had desecrated. Children who saw him swore he looked like a ghost. The baker, recognizing him, dropped a tray of loaves. Reverend Horner was fetched, but no one told Thomas. No one dared, except Michael himself. He came late that night. Rain fell in sheets, soaking the hill road to sludge. Wind howled through the trees like wolves in mourning. Thomas sat by the fire, sharpening a blade, not for use but out of habit, a steel edge to match the one he carried in his heart. And then came the sound. 3 knocks, slow, weak. Thomas froze. The blade in his hand trembled slightly, but he did not drop it. He knew those knuckles, that rhythm. He did not move. The knock came again, and then a voice, raspy, broken. "Thomas, I am not here to steal anything more, only to speak." Silence. Rain beating like were drums on a roof. "I buried in 3 winters ago," Michael continued. "Cancer. Slow. She suffered. I watched it eat her alive. And I thought of you, brother, of what I took. No answer. I deserve your hate. I know it. I wore like a coat for years. But I cannot carry it to the grave. I beg you, see me." But Thomas had already risen from his chair, not opened the door, to go to the cellar. There, in the damp dark, stood the tower of stones, almost to the ceiling now. He touched one with the flat of his palm. Cold, smooth, unforgiven. His breath came heavy. From outside, he heard coughing, deep rattling. "Brother, please," came the voice hoarse, and then, quieter, "I am so tired of running from your silence." Thomas stared at the stones. He could open the door, say nothing, let Michael inside, let him feel safe, and then bring him here, to the cellar. Let him see what his betrayal had become. Let him know every year, every scar of the soul had been marked and remembered and damned. Let him understand that this was justice. let him fall to his knees beneath the weight of it, and then leave him there, just as he had been left. Yes, yes. Thomas turned to the door and froze. The stones were whispering. It was subtle, almost imagined, but the way the wind curled down the stair, the way the shadows danced, it was as if each stone breathed a name. Michael and traitor, brother, vengeance. Cain. He dropped the knife, staggered backward, and then he heard the cane crack, a sickening snap, followed by a thud. Thomas rushed up the stairs. The door was still closed. He flung it open. Michael lay at the gate, slumped in the mud, face to the sky, eyes wide, dead. The rain had stopped. The wind, too. Only the river made sound now, churning below as if mocking. Thomas stood motionless in the doorway. He did not kneel. He did not cry. He simply whispered, "You were never welcome." And then he closed the door. Behind it, the stones remained, watching. For 2 days, the corpse remained. Michael's body lay at the base of the gate, face tilted toward the sky as if in prayer or accusation. The villagers whispered, but no one dared move him, not even Reverend Horner. They passed by the hill like mourners at a grave too sacred or too cursed to touch. And Thomas? He never left the house. The first night, he sat in the cellar. A lantern flickered on the wall, its light trembling over the jagged towers of stone. He stared at them as if waiting for something to move, something to speak. And it did, not in words, but in the weight. The cellar felt closer now, thicker, as if the stones had grown. He rose, sweating despite the chill, and placed a final stone, the largest one. He pressed it down onto the others like a seal upon a tomb. "This is finished," he whispered. But the stones didn't agree. That night he dreamed, and standing in the chapel in her wedding dress, veiled in black, her eyes were gone. In her arms was a child. It had no face. She opened her mouth, but only river water poured out. Thomas woke choking. The second night, the knocking began again, not from outside, from beneath. At first, he thought it the wind, but then it came again, steady like the heartbeat of the past trying to claw its way back. Knock, knock, knock. He grabbed a lantern, descended into the cellar, and stood barefoot in the silence. Stones stared back like watchers in a cathedral of wrath. Nothing moved, and yet the sound returned the moment he left. The third night, it was Michael's voice that came. "Brother, I am cold." Thomas screamed, but the sound didn't echo. He smashed the lantern. Glass burst across the stones. Darkness swallowed the cellar. The next morning, the villagers came. 4 men, black coats, bowed heads. They buried Michael beside the old ash tree, the same one where Thomas and once read psalms together under the afternoon sun. Thomas did not attend, but he watched. From the window, hand pressed against the glass like a man watching the gallows swing. Reverend Horner came the next day. Alone, he did not knock. He simply sat at the gate where the body had lain, resting on a worn bench, hands folded. After an hour, Thomas emerged. His face was hollow, his hands dirted with soot. He looked less like a man, more like a figure carved from grief. They didn't speak for a long while. Then the old man said, "Do you feel peace?" Thomas didn't answer. "You held your justice tight, boy. But justice without mercy is just vengeance dressed in robes. And vengeance," he paused, "will rot your soul in the name of righteousness." Thomas looked up, eyes bloodshot, lips cracked. "He begged me. He came to my door to die. That was his justice." Horner didn't argue. He only said, "You think you buried him, but it's yourself who lies in that grave." And then the Reverend stood, placed something at Thomas's feet, and walked away. It was a Bible. Thomas didn't pick it up. He turned, walked back into the house, and locked the door behind him. That night, the cellar called again. But this time, the stones didn't whisper. They screamed, not with sound, but with weight. The walls sweated. The air burned. He descended, candle in hand, and found the stones moved. One of the towers had collapsed, fallen forward like a corpse. Beneath it lay a single, smaller stone, one he didn't remember placing. Etched into it was a name. Thomas. He dropped it and fled. In the days that followed, the village returned to silence. But Thomas did not. He did not sleep. He did not eat. The cellar grew darker, the whispers sharper. And Ann's voice came again. Only this time it wasn't mournful. It was angry. You left me to rot in memory. You made me your ghost. He clutched his ears, but her voice burrowed deeper. He wandered the chapel alone one night, barefoot, bleeding, muttering scripture and curses like a madman. He knelt at the altar and screamed, "Where is justice, God? Where is your vengeance? I waited. I bore it. Where is your hand?" Only silence answered, until the door creaked, and in stepped Reverend Horner, holding something wrapped in cloth. He placed it beside Thomas, unwrapped it, a single stone, and on it, in ash, "Forgive, 70 times 7. Thomas stared, then wept, not for Michael, not for Anne, but for the man he had become. Thomas Reed stood at the edge of the river, the same place he once kissed his hand, once watched the spring thaw, once saw his brother laughing barefoot in the water, throwing stones like a boy who didn't know what betrayal was. Now the river roared, wild and brown with silt, heavy with the memory of spring rains, and of things buried. The sky was dark, a storm building, but refusing to break. In his arms, Thomas carried a bundle, the last stone, the one with his name. He had wrapped it in a strip torn from Anne's old shawl, the one she left behind. It still smelled faintly of lavender and thyme. Behind him, the village lights flickered like distant stars. No one followed him. No one knew he had left the house. But the stones did. They knew. Each one whispered behind his eyes, the weight of 30 years wrapped in granite and guilt. As he stepped into the water, the cold clutched him like hands from the grave. He remembered the first time Michael stole from him, but coins in their father's drawer. Thomas had taken the blame, beaten for it. Michael said nothing. He remembered when Anne chose Michael softly, gently, saying she didn't love Thomas that way. She hadn't meant to hurt him, but hurt him she did. He remembered the letter Michael sent when the child died, the apology, the begging. He never read it. He'd burned it unopened. That was the real betrayal, not what they did to him, but what he had done to his own soul. The river rose to his knees. He held the stone high like an offering. "I made a temple of anger," he said aloud, voice shaking. "I called it justice. I dressed it in your word, but it was never yours." Thunder cracked in the distance. "You said vengeance is mine, and I took it anyway." He sank to his knees. The stone pressed against his chest like judgment. "I thought if I carried the weight long enough, you would see me, approve me, that you'd let me hold the sword." He looked up. Clouds swirled like a wound across the heavens. "But you were never in the cellar, were you?" And then he wept. For Anne, for Michael, for himself, for every year lost a hate. He stood, unwrapped the stone, held it over the river. "Take it," he whispered, and let go. The stone sank, dragging the cloth with it, and Thomas stood there, hands empty for the first time in decades. And then it began to rain. Softly, not the storm he expected, but a baptism. The villagers found him in the morning, soaked, pale, sleeping at the riverbank. The shawl gone, the stone gone. Only his boots remained, wet and caked in river mud. Reverend Horner carried him home. He woke 2 days later, a whisper of a man, but alive. In the months that followed, Thomas changed. The forge burned again, but he no longer made weapons or locks. Only plows, hinges, frames for windows. He opened the cellar, one by one. He carried each stone to the river, every day, until the room was empty, until only dust remained. The villagers helped. Slowly, quietly, they carried stones to their own regrets, their own secret shames, and together they laid them in the river. A ritual reversed. On the day Thomas died, years later, they buried him beside Anne, not beside the ash tree, but under it. Michael had no grave. His body lay in the common field, unmarked. But Thomas had asked this in his will. Place no stone on my grave, only the word. So they carved into the bark of the tree, "Forgive, as you've been forgiven." And beneath it, the ground was soft and quiet. Years later, children played by the river. They skipped stones, built towers from them. And when one child asked where the stones came from, an old woman answered, "They came from a man who once mistook pain for justice. And God, in his mercy, took them from his hands." "Why?" the child asked. She smiled. "Because God is not a God of stones. He is a God of hearts made flesh again." And the child, not fully understanding, nodded and threw his stone into the river and watched it disappear.